We are diving deep into a moment that, well, it really just stopped the political world for a second. Erica Kirk's statement, I forgive him.
Yeah, just days after the assassination of her husband, Charlie Kirk. It's such a powerful moment.
Absolutely. And our mission today is really to unpack the paradox here. I mean, how does a message of ultimate grace, spiritual surrender, emerge from such intense tragedy?
And then, what happens when that forgiveness is almost immediately rejected,
Yeah.
publicly, by the very political movement it seemed intended to comfort?
It's fascinating. We're going to analyze the whole aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death. He was, the Washington Post called him one of the most visible and influential voices on the right. That's significant context.
Definitely. So we'll focus specifically on Erica Kirk's emotional address, that really sharp contrast with President Trump's response right there at the same event.
Right, the memorial. Yeah.
And how this whole attempt at reconciliation, this act of forgiveness, was received, how it was dissected, politicized, really, across the media spectrum.
From Fox News, CNN, all the way to, Reddit forums.
Exactly. Our sources are pretty extensive for this. We've got transcripts from the memorial service itself, reporting from CBS, AP, Fox News, CNN, a real cross-section.
Plus detailed YouGov polling data on how the public reacted, and those deep dives into social media discussions, which can be, well, quite revealing.
You certainly can. Look, if you believe in peeling back the layers, finding genuine understanding beyond the headlines, make sure you're following our channel, Kaisen.
Yeah, hit subscribe right now. We promise to give you the context, the insights you probably won't find anywhere else.
Okay, so to really grasp the power and, frankly, the controversy surrounding Erica Kirk's statement, we need to set the scene properly.
Let's start with Charlie Kirk himself. Conservative activist, broadcaster, co-founder of Turning Point USA, known for, I guess you'd say, his aggressive campus style.
That's absolutely crucial context, yeah. His organization, TPUSA, had something like over 2,000 chapters, high schools, college campuses nationwide.
Huge reach.
Huge. And his personal brand, it was built on confrontation. He famously did that prove me wrong table thing, right? Inviting arguments, often going viral.
Deliberately provocative. A strategy designed for engagement, for controversy. It put him right on the front lines of the culture wars.
Exactly. And it was literally on those front lines where the tragedy struck. September 10th, speaking at an outdoor event at Utah Valley University, fatally shot.
The FBI almost immediately called it a targeted event. The alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, charged with aggravated murder, other serious counts. The political shockwaves were instant, given who Kirk was.
And the reaction from his movement, his family, it was, as you'd expect, incredibly intense.
Which brings us to Erica Kirk's messages, because there were really two distinct ones, weren't there? Separated by just a few days.
That's right, and they really show the tension, I think, between that raw personal grief and the demands of political mobilization.
So the first one came really soon after his death. A live stream from TPUSA headquarters.
Yep. Sources show, okay, she did the expected thanks, first responders, staff, the White House, but the core of it, it was raw, fierce, and really focused on retribution.
It really was. She pledged to continue his mission. My husband's voice will remain. Powerful stuff.
But the dominant feeling, the language she used, it was anger, righteous anger. She said, you have no idea the fire that you have ignited within this wife.
The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry. Wow.
Yeah. That initial message was a classic call to arms, wasn't it? Framed through grief, yes, but definitely a political vow. His enemies wouldn't win.
Yeah.
His ideals would live on.
It felt like that immediate, very human reaction to violence. Seek vengeance, continue the fight.
Exactly. Now contrast that.
Yeah.
Just days later, the memorial service. State Farm Stadium, Glendale, Arizona, home of the NFL's Cardinals.
I mean, the scale itself speaks volumes. That place seats, what, over 70,000?
And it was packed,
Yeah.
filled. So this wasn't just a funeral. It transformed into something bigger, a kind of spiritual revival mixed right in with a massive political rally.
And the security situation underlined the tension, right? Sources mention high-profile speakers were behind bulletproof glass.
Yeah, a really chilling reminder of the violence that brought them all there. The mood was, deep mourning, but also this intense vulnerability mixed with political fervor.
So when Erica Kirk addressed that enormous crowd, her message, it shifted dramatically from that battle cry
to this deep reflection on Christian faith, really centered on spiritual surrender. She mentioned one of Charlie's favorite Bible verses, Isaiah 6:8.
Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And the answer,
Here I am, Lord, send me.
She even reflected on having cautioned him about using it so often.
saying, if you keep saying that, God might actually take you up on it. Literally.
Right. So this idea that Charlie was chosen by God to go, it became central to reframing a political assassination as part of a divine plan.
And that spiritual framing, it led to what she shared next, this very intimate moment of comfort, but shared with tens of thousands.
Talking about seeing a faintest smile on his lips at the hospital. Yeah. And interpreting that as great mercy from God, an assurance that Charlie didn't suffer, that his death was instant.
That detail, the smile, the idea of instant paradise, that seems to be what allowed her personally to move beyond the political tragedy.
As one source described it, Charlie was killed while fighting for the gospel in front of a big crowd, and then he blinked. He blinked and saw his savior in paradise.
It's a powerful narrative.
Yeah.
It essentially removes the need for personal vengeance from her equation.
And sets the stage for the truly radical declaration that came next.
Right. This is the absolute crux of it, the moment where the spiritual path and the political path just completely diverge.
Standing there, before tens of thousands of his most dedicated supporters, the biggest names in the Republican Party.
Erica Kirk makes this explicit declaration: forgiveness for the man charged with killing her husband.
She says the words, "I forgive him." And her reasoning was so clear, wasn't it? Rooted in her faith, yes, but also tied to how she saw Charlie's purpose.
Exactly. She said she didn't want that man's blood on my ledger,
Hmm.
which is, that's a direct theological counterpoint to the Utah prosecutors who were pursuing the death penalty.
It's incredibly complex. It wasn't just forgiveness. It felt like a plea for mercy for the killer, directly challenging the state's push for ultimate retribution.
And she tied it back to Charlie's character, or at least her perception of it. My marriage with Charlie was the best thing that ever happened to me. He was a missionary, a noble spirit. He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them.
Wow. By any measure, that's an extraordinary act of grace delivered in a moment that felt like it was demanding vengeance.
Overwhelmingly so. But the tension just ratcheted up instantly, because right after this profound spiritual message
Came the sharpest possible political counterpoint, President Trump, rejecting the very idea of loving your opponent.
the contrast, it couldn't have been more stark or more politically revealing, perhaps. Trump gets up there at the memorial for a man he's calling a great American hero, a martyr.
And he directly takes issue with Erica's description of her husband's compassion. He repeats her words. He did not hate his opponents. He wanted the best for them.
And then slams down the rejection. That's where I disagreed with Charlie. I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them.
He even apologizes, sort of. I am sorry, Erica. But now Erica can talk to me and the whole group, and maybe they can convince me that's not right, but I cannot stand my opponent.
It's really fascinating. Our sources suggest, and it seems likely, this wasn't just an off-the-cuff disagreement. It felt calculated.
Like he was setting the tone for the movement post-Kirk.
Precisely. Publicly rejecting that spiritual path of grace and substituting it right then and there with his clear declaration of unapologetic, identity-based political hate, antagonism.
It just lays bare that deep philosophical split right on the stage.
Yeah.
Erica Kirk channeling a radical religious ideal, love your enemy.
And Trump confirming the political reality, maybe the political necessity, as he saw it, for the movement. That hard friend-enemy distinction. The moment forced a choice.
Personal faith versus political loyalty. Choose now.
It became an instant loyalty test, didn't it? By saying, I hate my opponent, Trump basically signaled that the political requirements of the movement, of his leadership, trumped the spiritual call for mercy, even from the grieving widow.
It's like the movement absorbed the tragedy but just spat out the grace.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
This really cuts to the heart of so much division in American political life today. And look, we want to hear from you, our listeners, right now. Before we get into how this death was, frankly, weaponized.
Yeah, pause this for a second.
When you're faced with deep political injury, or you see it happen, which path resonates more with you? The spiritual path of forgiveness, like Erica Kirk expressed? Or the demand for immediate political retribution, like Trump voiced?
It's a huge question. Just drop a number in the comments below. Write 0 if you lean towards forgiveness, or write 1 if you lean towards retribution. 0 for forgiveness, 1 for retribution. Let us know your gut reaction.
We're really curious to see what you think, because the public reaction, the YouGov polling, the reports, they showed this exact split immediately.
Absolutely. You had a segment, especially maybe those focusing more on the religious side, who saw Erica Kirk's forgiveness as genuinely moving, morally powerful.
But a big chunk of the highly politicized base, they sided with Trump instantly. The message within the conservative political world seemed to be, this is a time for strength, for vengeance, not for grace.
The narrative just wasn't allowed to settle on the transformative power of faith. It was immediately sucked into the vortex of political mobilization.
Yeah, and you saw that not just from the president, but from pretty much every other speaker who followed on that stage.
Yeah, the stage very quickly went from memorial to mobilization platform.
Yeah.
And the key narrative tool, martyrdom.
Right. That clash between forgiveness and fury just escalated as speaker after speaker defined how Charlie Kirk's death would be leveraged for the movement he built.
The message was pretty unified on this point. Kirk was a hero, and he was a martyr. You heard it from Vice President J.D. Vance, from Benny Johnson, Donald Trump Jr., even the CEO of Turning Point UK, Jack Ross.
They were elevating it beyond just a political assassination. It was framed as a sacrifice for Christian faith, for liberty, for America itself.
And Benny Johnson, he really pushed that comparison hard. He explicitly likened Kirk to Stephen, the first Christian martyr in the Bible.
Who, as the story goes in Acts, forgave his killers even as they were stoning him.
Exactly. So Johnson sets up this parallel of righteous sacrifice, but then immediately twists it. He uses it not to echo Stephen's grace, but to demand political action, state action. He referenced the book of Romans.
Talking about rulers wielding the sword for the terror for evil men in our nation in Charlie's memory.
So you see, the message of Christian sacrifice gets instantly merged with a demand for state-sanctioned force for retribution. It's the complete opposite of Stephen's final act.
And that contrast just got amplified by the purely vengeful rhetoric coming from the same stage, completely pushing aside Erica Kirk's message. Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff.
His speech was all righteous fury, the dragon you have awakened. I mean, this wasn't mourning anymore. This was a declaration of war against the political left. Full stop.
Miller made some pretty extraordinary claims, too, politicizing Kirk's final moments. He alleged Kirk's last message to him was about needing an organized strategy to go after the left-leaning organizations that are promoting violence.
Which many disputed, but he stated it as fact from that stage. And then he vowed this radical response. He said the administration would commit to destroy progressive political organizations in retaliation.
Using federal resources for an act of vengeance against these groups.
Just pause on that for a second. The sheer cognitive dissonance. You have the widow saying, I forgive the killer.
And minutes later, a top administration official promising, in the name of the deceased, to destroy entire organizations on the other side.
The spiritual message of forgiveness became, in real time, almost like a backdrop to amplify this message of total political warfare.
It really forces you into that theological debate our sources were exploring. Can forgiveness and political justice actually coexist?
OSV News, the Catholic source, had an interesting take. They noted that true forgiveness means to refuse to hate or want revenge.
Okay.
But it strengthens your desire and need for justice because justice and forgiveness, mercy, have to go together.
So the idea is they're separate, but maybe complementary. Forgiveness is personal letting go of resentment. Justice is societal accountability, moral order. You can forgive the person, but still want the state to punish the crime.
Right. That's one theological perspective. But our sources also brought in crucial contrasts, looking at other traditions, like in Judaism, Maimonides' view on Amalek.
The commandment to destroy their memory, to remember hatred for certain enemies.
Exactly. It shows that the specific Christian ideal, Erica Kirk, invoked love your enemies. It's a specific cultural and religious mandate. It's not universal.
And in that highly charged political moment, that specific mandate was being asked to do political work that the movement's leaders, like Trump and Miller, were just explicitly refusing to do.
And the public reaction online, especially places like Reddit, people picked up on this dissonance immediately.
You saw both sides, right? Some users genuinely found Erica Kirk's forgiveness empowering. They saw it as the real deal, what Christian faith actually demands, rejecting hate, loving enemies.
But the skepticism was huge. So many people called it performative, a grotesque display of Christianity used for propaganda or grift.
They asked really pointed questions, too, like, did she really mean it if she didn't push back when Trump said he hates his opponents right after her speech?
Yeah, that was a big one. Does forgiveness mean anything if it's immediately drowned out by calls for vengeance and destruction?
As one user put it, something like, it's performative and hard to mean anything at a ceremony that has had so much hate spewed in it.
It wasn't necessarily questioning her personal faith, maybe, but questioning the sincerity of the political stage itself.
Okay, so here's where the paradox gets really deep. And frankly, quite ironic. Charlie Kirk built his whole brand on free speech, right? Railing against so-called cancel culture on campus.
Constantly, that was his bread and butter.
Yet his death and the way Erica Kirk's forgiveness was received, it immediately triggered this massive organized campaign to silence his critics.
Yes, civil liberties experts were immediately alarmed. Aaron Terr from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, he pointed out that glaring inconsistency.
He said, look, the assassination was obviously an attack on free expression, but then conservatives turned around and launched this public campaign to identify critics and get them fired.
And it wasn't just organic anger bubbling up. The New York Times called it a conservative version of the cancel culture. Some called it the rise of a woke right.
It felt organized. Prominent Republican officials, conservative media figures putting pressure on employers.
The language was pretty aggressive, too. You had Attorney General Pam Bondi indicating they would target speech critical of Kirk, calling it hate speech.
Which, as First Amendment experts quickly pointed out, is a legally slippery slope. There's no neutral definition of hate speech. Using it against political criticism risks turning it into a tool for suppression.
And the consequences were real. Let's just look at the scale, domestic and international. It shows how powerful this pressure campaign was. The biggest target, Jimmy Kimmel.
Oh yeah, the Kimmel situation was explosive. His show, Jimmy Kimmel Live, suspended indefinitely.
Because he accused the May-Gay gang, his words, of exploiting the tragedy for political gain, not sincere grief. And he threatened to label the shooter as one of them.
And the reaction went right to the top. The FCC chief, Brendan Carr, publicly threatened ABC, talked about maybe revoking broadcast licenses.
Which is extraordinary. The FCC usually deals with obscenity, clear rule violations, not political commentary like that.
The ACLU jumped in immediately, calling it beyond McCarthyism. The chilling effect on broadcasters must have been intense.
Huge. And this crackdown wasn't just hitting celebrities. It hit everyday people across the country, people with far less protection.
Teachers in Texas fired or investigated for comments. A Secret Service agent, Anthony Powell, put on leave for posting that Kirk spewed hate and racism. Students expelled.
It even went international. A stylist for Vogue Brazil fired over posts. A president-elect of the Oxford Union facing disciplinary action. A UK council member resigned after a good riddance comment.
It shows the reach of this organized campaign, using the tragedy, using the grief to demand ideological conformity.
Now here's the final, maybe the most crucial paradox in all this. Despite all the division, forgiveness versus vengeance, despite the clampdown on speech, the organization Kirk built, it didn't just survive, it exploded.
It's genuinely astonishing when you look at the numbers. Turning Point USA reported getting, 62,000 new student signups right after his death.
62,000, think about that. Plus another 32,000 inquiries about starting new chapters. The tragedy became an unprecedented recruiting drive.
Unbelievable. And the money followed, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. Sources said donations just poured in, topped $6 million very quickly after Kirk's death. Maid donors were stepping up to give, raise, and pledge millions more.
So the financial consolidation basically guaranteed the movement's continuation and massive expansion.
This level of growth, financial and organizational, right after an act of political violence, it suggests a really powerful incentive structure, doesn't it?
It makes the martyr narrative, especially when you pair it with that promise of vengeance, look like maybe the most potent organizing force out there today.
Which leads us to the new face of the movement, Erica Kirk. She's stepped up to lead the organization.
Positioning herself to potentially inherit and benefit from this huge conservative platform, it echoes history, right? Coretta Scott King, Jackie Kennedy, spouses stepping into leadership roles.
And her personal brand, her clothing line proclaims streetwear. It already targets young conservative Christian women. It aligns perfectly with this new, incredibly powerful organizational role she's taken on.
So you have this extraordinary convergence, a singular act of profound grace.
A calculated political rejection of that grace by the movement's leader.
And the end result is massive, unprecedented political and financial growth.
It really suggests the fight over the forgiveness narrative wasn't really about forgiveness at all. It was maybe a battle for how best to capitalize on the martyrdom. Hashtag tag outro.
So our deep dive today, it really reveals a truth that kind of goes beyond just the politics of the moment. Erica Kirk's powerful message of personal forgiveness. It was clearly an act of deep faith, meant to honor her husband's spiritual mission as she saw it.
But it was almost instantly rendered politically.
Yeah.
Well, inert seems like the right word. Or maybe worse, it became just background noise.
Yeah, instead of inspiring any kind of reconciliation or even just a pause for reflection on grace, that act of forgiveness just ended up highlighting the incredibly intense, radicalizing divisions we see in American public life.
The real debate that unfolded wasn't truly about the killer's soul or the moral path forward after tragedy. It was really a battleground.
A battleground for defining who gets to mourn, who gets to speak, and, maybe most importantly, who gets defined as the irredeemable enemy that deserves destruction.
And the movement Kirk built, it didn't just survive, it thrived, grew exponentially, which demonstrates pretty clearly that in these hyperpolarized times, martyrdom, especially when it's combined with the call for righteous fury, is an incredibly potent organizing tool and fundraising tool.
We literally saw political violence lead directly to massive organizational growth, huge financial rewards, and this simultaneous rhetorical crackdown on any opposing speech.
Which leaves us, and hopefully you, with this final, maybe unsettling, provocative thought to mull over.
If this kind of extreme political conflict, specifically a political assassination, results in this level of organizational growth, this much financial reward, what does that tell us?
What does it tell us about the future incentives that might actually be driving extreme political conflict in America? Are we, in a way, incentivizing the very thing we claim to hate?
It's a tough question. We really want to know your thoughts on this whole situation. Do you think public forgiveness, even an act as monumental as Erica Kirk's, has any real chance of changing the climate? Can it cut through deep political polarization?
Let us know. Pause right now. Share just a simple thought in the comments. Can forgiveness realistically change the political weather today?
Yeah, let us know what you think. And please, if you found these insights useful, if this deep dive gave you something to think about, follow Kaizen.
We appreciate you spending the time to seek knowledge with us. We'll keep digging into these complex stories.